Horshaw, who's the head of strategy for OMD Asia Pacific. Paddy looks beyond traditional planning currencies to elevate the role of communications in driving behaviour change. He started his career at Manning Gottlieb, OMD in London. And so would you both like to come to the stage now? Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you everyone for coming, both those people I know and the other two people in the room. I was told I had kind of 40 minutes to talk at Mumbrella, which was great, very excited. I can't pretend I knew exactly what I was going to talk about. So thought about it for a while, and then I remembered a conversation I'd had with a professor called Mikhail Kaczynski, who works at Stanford University. Now, his background is that he invented the methodology behind the Trump and Brexit campaign wins, how you're going to use Facebook data to analyze that. But when I was talking to him, and I've seen it subsequently, he's used it in some talks I've seen online, he spoke about a particular quote, which has now gone wonky there, except that it's the end of privacy and build society around it. Sorry, my thing's not working here. Anyway, so this quote, it was... for me, it was one of those things where often you see a quote and you just use it in a presentation as a useful prop. In this instance, it was one of those ones that really got me thinking for a long time. So whilst data privacy is not my area of expertise, there was a lot in there. There was a lot in there that started to get me thinking in a multitude of different ways. And I'm not going to lie to you, but I went to some pretty dark places over the course of my research for this particular talk. And what I want to do first off is give you a little taster of what we're going to talk about today, give you a little taster of what's in my mind, having spent a couple of weeks researching what data privacy is all about, and rather than just thinking about the kind of ad tech side of things, thinking about overall what is going to be the broader impact on society. So this is the inside of my mind at the moment. Yeah. Okay, technical hitch. That is literally what's in the inside of my mind at the moment, because the video is not currently working. Apologies. Okay, right. It was a very entertaining video that had a broad range of things hinted at, everything from Edward Snowden to Donald Trump to some 1800s pseudoscience, and all of that are all the topics upon which we'll touch over the course of today. What I wanted to do first, before thinking about kind of data privacy and the implications of that in the modern world, was to think about more broadly, what does privacy mean to human beings? What is our natural state? And this guy, Gregory Ferenstein, he talks about how actually the human state is, natural humanity is transparency. So we're not used, we have a thought now that privacy is a right, but actually humankind over time has got very used to not having any level of privacy. So if you go all the way back to the caveman, privacy effectively meant being cold, having no food, not having a mate, etc. So humanity there, the privacy value equation was very much leaning towards being with people all the time, because that's what survival meant. If you go forward a number of millennia, you then get towards something like the bubonic plague, the Black Death, where people started realizing that being in close proximity to people all the time meant that that privacy value equation had to be readdressed, so they wanted a greater degree of privacy. And it was actually during the Black Death that the concept of the single bed really got invented, because people realized that the value equation of being next to each other all the time wasn't exactly that great. We then see things like the printing press. So we think now of reading as something which is a solitary action. It's something we do to be alone and spend time with ourselves. It wasn't until the printing press came along that reading was something solitary and private. Before that, it was something very public. It was all about public readings. Then you move through the Renaissance, and the architecture started getting more sophisticated. People started living on their own in certain rooms in the house. But even that didn't get more broadly adopted until the Industrial Revolution in the mid-1800s. So Gregory Ferenstein's hypothesis is that actually our natural state is transparency, that our expectation for privacy that we have nowadays is something that's only about 150 years old. And I think this sets an interesting context for what we're going to talk about now as we start to see some of the disruption that's going to happen in society as new technologies and new data streams come on board. So I talk about this privacy value equation and how this is something over centuries that humans have started to think about at each point as to how do I trade off privacy against my need for survival and thriving. And there's a number of things which are putting it under strain at the moment, which I'm sure we're all familiar with. Now, these different tensions, you bucket them in three ways. There's tensions coming from states, from governments, from non-states, so upsurgent governments, things like Al-Qaeda and ISIS, etc., and net states as well, so the likes of Google, Facebook, etc. Probably be familiar with Edward Snowden. Now, this is obviously huge tensions here as to is he traitor or patriot. So it's brought up a lot in terms of people's minds about judging. You know, I'm worried that all this data exists there in the government's hands, but at the same time, I know that they have that data to keep me safe. There's a big wrestle there, traitor or patriot, that's taking place constantly, so that value equation being looked at all the time. Obviously, terrorism as well. These are all the terrorism hotspots all over the world. You can see it's not kind of resigned to one particular place. But again, terrorism is making people judge whether I want that privacy anymore. It's becoming more and more complex as well as you get the likes of ISIS, and not just kind of ISIS fighting as a force, but starting to push towards things like clean skins. So effectively looking to recruit people who have very little prior connection towards any terrorist cell. What this is forcing the government to do is obviously intrude further and further into our everyday lives. But all of us, again, are thinking about that tension. Yes, I don't like my privacy being invaded, but at the same time, I don't want terrible things to happen to me or the society in which I live. There's bad forces that we can see, but are we even more scared of those kind of negative forces that we can't see? So Anonymous, again, to a certain degree, it feels anarchic in a way that they can usurp kind of big government and big companies, but at the same time, when it comes too close to home, it is a worrying thing. So again, another tension in society that reevaluates that kind of privacy value equation. And obviously, Google, Facebook, and I couldn't find one that also had the Amazon logo on there and a multitude of others. But obviously, Facebook now is apparently 40% bigger than China is, assuming all of its profiles are real, but 40% bigger than China. So there's an enormous amount of data residing with these people. And again, we love what they do for us. Sorry, my thing down here is flicking on about 800 slides. We love what they do for us from a social perspective, streamlining our lives. But at the same time, again, there's a slight nervousness about them having that amount of data upon us and the depth of that data that they use. And even if for the likes of Facebook, they have that data, they don't use it, but they really could ultimately. So again, that makes us nervous. And it's only going to get more intense as we start to think about things like cryptocurrencies. Even if you don't become someone that indulges in cryptocurrencies and actually takes that as a path of investment, at the same time, it's a new way of looking at those sorts of things that we're used to doing in life in a totally new way that we're very unfamiliar with. So the kind of the insidious sense that we have less control over our lives, that our privacy is constantly being invaded, I think is putting a really interesting dynamic on life. So we've gone from an age where transparency was the norm through to an age where privacy is something that we expect. And now we're at a point in society's existence where we're readdressing whether that's the right thing to have. So Guy, I'm going to now hand over to Guy. I know this thing is going absolutely bonkers at the front.
Forward, right?
Yeah, forward.
Okay. So what technologies then are actually starting to change the game in relation to privacy and what that means for us as consumers and members of society and ultimately as marketeers? So the first of these elements is machine vision, the abilities of machines to read faces and to draw certain conclusions from those faces as they go forward. No, what am I doing wrong, Paddy? Good. Okay, so already, statistically, over half of all Americans are on various police recognition, facial recognition databases, which are gradually getting connected up to each other. Although the US being a federated state, some of that connection doesn't work quite as seamlessly as it ultimately will, but it will do. How are people on this database? Not everybody, not over half of all people are being arrested. So we willingly give up our facial recognition details all the time. We do it for driver's licenses, we do it for passports, we do it for other types of identification very frequently. Of the 50% of Americans who are on various facial recognition databases, around 80% or so have committed no crimes and have had no contact with police or other authorities. But there they are, and they can be easily identified. And of course, some of us have been in a lineup. I won't ask you to put your hands up if you've ever had that picture of yourself taken. But of course, some people have had those sort of pictures taken. So what do we do with all of that? Well, in various countries, authorities are dealing with this in different ways. In China, as you may know, where the population is perhaps more used to a slightly more authoritarian way of going about things, there's a project in place to put all 1.4 billion citizens into facial recognition databases so that they can be identified. But China, being both having the scale to do things quickly and secondly having the ability to apply a soft touch with an iron glove, are doing it in a way that adds layers of utility into the process for people. So 3 examples of that utility that's being built. It's Huangzhou, isn't it? Yeah, in Huangzhou, Alibaba and KFC together are putting forward a technology which allows you to pay via facial recognition. Right? It's called Smile Pay. And so enables you to get facial recognition. We recognize you and we'll deduct the money from your Ali wallet or whichever other mobile payment solution that you're using. So you can see why that adds a layer of utility in for consumers, and people might be willing to add that level of facial recognition into it. China Southern, one of the major airlines in China, are experimenting with facial recognition to issue boarding passes, which again, if you're like me and you constantly lose your boarding pass somewhere between checking in and getting on the plane, this adds a layer of utility that's really quite useful and beneficial for consumers. If you go to Beijing Normal University, you want to get into the female dormitories, as you might, you will have to have facial recognition scanned so that only people who are assigned to be living in those dormitories are able to get in. And you can see, again, from a consumer perspective, why that adds a layer of utility that people might be prepared to forego the privacy or anonymity components to get that level of utility. But of course, we give up facial recognition data every day. We give it up through the photographs and through the videos that we post online. One example of that is Facebook, who've been working on deep face technology for a number of years, based on the photographs that are on the platform, and reportedly have a 97% hit rate in recognizing you from a particular photograph, right? So that's recognition of you. We know that you are this person based on all the other photographic data that we have. But there's another layer, of course, to that, which Paddy's going to talk about a little bit more in the next section, which is it's fine to know that photo is Paddy Crawshaw. It's something else again to look at the photo of Paddy Crawshaw and try to determine elements about him or about his character, or about his social circumstances from the facial recognition data. And I guess one of the first steps on that pathway is around the reading of emotions. Facebook have got patents pending for technology which recognizes people's emotional states. Various other ad tech partners that we work with also have technology that says we can tell from your facial recognition what your response is to this particular piece of content that you're being exposed to. So to take the classic example, which is always used in here, if you like watching cat videos, and let's face it, who doesn't? Then we will be able to see the facial recognitions that go with that emotional connections to the cat. And so whatever it is that makes you react in this way, we will send you more of that stuff because that really makes you happy. If we see that you're reacting in a despondent or bored way, such as in my case, I was brought up in the city of Birmingham in the UK, and so any picture of Birmingham would obviously give a very downcast look to my face. Any shot of the middle of town or something, oh God. So will give me less of that type of content, and I never need to see a picture of Birmingham again, which would suit me perfectly fine. So that level of emotional facial recognition to drive emotional response, again, could be considered to be something that adds a layer of utility for consumers, which they might be getting interested in. So we willingly give over that data based on our photographs and videos, the 1 petabyte of video that is now being updated from Facebook Live and similar live video platforms, the 1 petabyte a day. And if you don't know how much 1 petabyte is, it is a 1 with a whole bunch of zeros after it, and it is about the same amount of data that it took to render the film Avatar. That's every day, right? In terms of the video content. But there's also the things that the data that we give up without necessarily meaning to, such as through CCTV cameras. Now, by 2025, the size of the CCTV camera industry globally is predicted to be at around 23 billion. A lot of that growth is coming from our region. As governments become more interested in security and surveillance, and retailers become more interested in capture the images of people coming in and out of their stores. By the way, if you read the crime statistics, there's no evidence whatsoever that the presence of CCTV camera does anything to the crime rates whatsoever, but it does allow you to capture images. One of the things you may be interested in is that the company Taser, you know tasers, right? You fire tasers and you don't know quite what it does, but you stun people in various ways. Well, they've changed their name from the very sort of vicious-sounding Taser to the much more neutral and friendly-sounding name Axon. And Axon just sounds like a third-party data provider, right? I'm probably meeting them next week. And the reason they're doing that is because not only do they provide weaponry now for police departments, they provide the software which enables all the video coming from CCTV and coming from body cameras and similar surveillance. It provides the software that allows those police departments and authorities to upload all that video into centralized places, but it also allows for the video to be edited. So never before believe that just because video comes from a CCTV camera, that it is in some way necessarily raw and unedited footage, because the ability to edit that footage is embedded into some of the software that's being spoken about. And the other thing that's really going to be involuntary and is really going to change the amount of data that's available in our world is through automated cars and automated commercial vehicles. And in reality, actually, automated commercial vehicles will probably come before in wide-scale adoption between automated cars. But if you're in a vehicle of some description, there's going to be video being collected not only of what's going on the inside, but video collected about what's going on the outside. And you are going to be picked up in those videos as you walk down the street doing whatever. And it's at this moment legislatively unclear who has the ownership of that data and what the rights of people captured within that framework are. So as we get towards 2035, or you probably get some partial adoption coming in around 2020. As I say, it may become mainly through more commercial vehicles or delivery vehicles. And as we get to consumers in limited roadways start to be able to use automated vehicles by about 2030, the amount of your personal data about your image is going to be collected at an exponentially faster rate than it is currently.
Okay, so there's some interesting ways in which they're collecting a vast amount more data, increasingly live data, live footage, etc. So starting to feed machine vision. But it's clear that the scientists are starting to get a bit more ambitious in what they're trying to achieve here. So just pose the question of what if we could see without sight and listen without sound? So we would think with facial recognition technology that we can start to maybe disguise ourselves. We could wear a scarf, we could wear a hat, a hoodie, dark glasses, we could dye our hair extraordinary colors. And we think maybe that would work, maybe that would disguise ourselves. But they're doing more and more work now that said that the accuracy with which they can detect people, regardless of whether they're wearing a scarf, a hat, or a hoodie, is growing exponentially. So they've just got more data, it's richer, the algorithm has more data to work with, the data points they need on the face are fewer, so we're less able to disguise ourselves and protect ourselves from any facial recognition technology if that's something that we seek to do. Guy spoke about DeepFace, the Facebook technology. So rich now is their algorithm, and so strong is their ability to recognize faces. It's in fact now stronger than the NSA's. They can start to pick up people regardless of whether their face is in the picture or not. So if they see a glimpse of your shirt, they can say, well, so-and-so wears grey shirts a lot, he's often with these sorts of people, he's often got these sorts of brands in shot and this sort of background, he must be in that photo. And so with a great degree of accuracy, you don't even need to be in the photo to have your face effectively recognized. So again, the science is there to start to really push things. The weirdest one, I think, is this. So they've started to be able to film through a window a crisp packet on a floor, so no microphone on the camera or anything like that, but pick up the audio waves and the movements on the crisp packet and actually be able to read the conversation within the room. Now, what you do with a piece of technology like this is beyond me, but it does demonstrate the determination and the money that's being put into being able to record things like this with potentially nefarious reasons. And now we kind of push, as I say, I went to some fairly dark places. I went through the research for this, and let's kind of move slowly into that. What could the societal upshot be of all of this technology being developed? And the danger is that facial recognition technology in the hands of the world's authoritarians is going to become quite a dangerous thing. So there's a huge investment from a police perspective, in policing perspective, in facial recognition technology. This is particularly in the UK, who have just commissioned an enormous, great study in this and commissioned some technology to work for them. And as police bodies around the world, but particularly in Western Europe and the States, start getting their budgets cut, then the role of facial recognition technology will only grow and grow. That includes with things like drones as well, picking up a lot of footage from there. This is a technology that's just been launched in Singapore, actually. It's a tiny drone that can take off the back of a moving car, and they can send these into buildings, and they can view the building, do a 3D color rendering of the building before the building has to get stormed or whatever. Well, that might not happen a lot in Singapore, but they're selling the technology to other parts of the world. So as I said, drones are going to be a big role in policing. There's going to be more footage and more use of facial recognition technology. Obviously, immigration is a big issue around the world. Not just Donald Trump, but pretty much everywhere, but he's obviously the representation of it. But the use of that technology at airports, at any point of immigration, is only growing. This is a slightly less terrible use of facial recognition technology. This is the Chinese government obviously discovered there was a terrible problem at the Temple of Heaven in Beijing, that people were using far too much toilet paper, and it was costing them a fortune. So they've used facial recognition technology such that you get exactly 14 sheets of toilet roll every 2 hours, and you can't get any more until it decides you could potentially need it. Okay, so it's not all bad. Apparently they saved 70% on their toilet roll budget, which has got to be a good thing. Okay, so now let's go a bit deeper in terms of what we can get from the face. Not just recognizing the face, but reading something into it. Now, so sometimes you do use a quote as a prop in a presentation, but Cicero said the face is the index to the soul. So I don't think the face is ever, it says now, is ever going to give away what's inside our soul, because as human beings we've got to define what we mean by a soul in the first place. But we are starting to find that we can see a lot about people's kind of persuasions, preferences, personalities, etc. So what machines are starting to be able to do, what machine vision is starting to be able to do, is replicate that 1/10 of a second. What I mean by 1/10 of a second is that 1/10 of a second that we have evolved to have it to judge a person when we see them. So I can look at a face and decide pretty much, is that person trustworthy? Is it someone I need to run from? Is it someone who I can hang around with? And I can judge certain elements of what their lifestyle would be like as well. So as the data becomes richer, as the technology gets more sophisticated, we're starting to replicate that instinct, that intuition, rather than simply the intelligence. So effectively, what we're coming full circle back to are the kind of pseudosciences of the early mid-1800s. So I'm not sure if you've ever heard of phrenology and physiognomy. Phrenology was when they thought they could feel your skull, and depending on the shape of it, they could say how intelligent you were, whether you're a good mother or a bad mother, this sort of thing. So phrenology was the shape of the skull. This was debunked about 50 years later, but many people were convicted, arrested on the basis of the shape of their skull. Physiognomy was more the shape of the body, how you walked, your full face, everything like this. Again, another pseudoscience, but again, one that was people put a lot of stock in back in those days. They thought that simply by looking at your face, they could read a lot into it, such that it almost changed the course of history. This is a young Charles Darwin. He almost didn't make it onto the Beagle, the ship that took him to the Galapagos Islands to discover evolution. And he almost didn't make it on because Robert Fitzroy, who was the captain of the Beagle, thought that his big nose must mean that he didn't have the requisite amount of energy that required from all the team members on the ship. The only thing that saved him was the fact that his eyebrows were close enough together that it balanced out his big nose. So this, again, it was pseudoscience. It's all a bit silly, but again, it has the potential to change the course of human history. So what does it mean now? Now they're looking at how they can read into imagery things like your IQ. And they can do this with a fair amount of accuracy, right? Whether it's not 50%, it's more like 60, 70, 80% accuracy as to whether someone is above or below average IQ. So now let's think about what are the potential repercussions for society. So we said at the beginning, a matter of life, death, and marketing. Let's start to think what are the repercussions for society. If you start to think that people can read into your face what your IQ is, so would you be so willing to start putting your image up online, especially not on things like LinkedIn, if you felt like an employer actually believed in this technology and therefore could read in potentially what your IQ would be? Probably not. You'd be a bit more reluctant to. They can also read with good accuracy what your political persuasion is now. So in the States, they've done studies as to whether faces indicate whether you're more Republican or Democrat. Again, in the States, maybe it's just a bit of fun. Maybe it'd be a way in which you'd eventually target during an ad campaign or something like this. But it's not all that friendly in every part of the world. There are many parts of the world where political dissidents are not exactly tolerated to a great degree. So once you start being able to read things like that, and once authoritarian states start to believe in the sorts of technologies that we might think are ridiculous, once they are able to put an empirical value against your likelihood to vote for one party or another in a country where political dissent is not appreciated, then society starts to be in a really dangerous place. Now, the professor who I spoke about right at the beginning, he's got himself in slightly hot water recently because the study he did indicated that he could tell from people's faces what their sexual orientation was. And he did this using kind of photos taken from gay dating websites and things like this, cross-referencing them with photos of straight people, and eventually coming out with an indication as to which ones, with a fair degree of accuracy again, as to which ones were gay and which ones were straight. He said, I don't know why it's telling me this. I don't know. I can't put a facial feature next to a particular sexual orientation. But for some reason, the machine is able to tell me this. Now, it doesn't really matter eventually whether we think this is true or not. What matters is that someone might think it's true. We might get someone in some part of the world where being gay is potentially punishable by death, and there's plenty of countries in which that is still the case, and even more where it's heavy jail sentences, even life sentences. As soon as some leader in Mauritania starts to think, I believe in this, I believe I can put an empirical value against the likelihood of this person being gay, that's a massive problem. Society is starting to move in a very dangerous direction. So many of these countries, your political persuasion, your sexual orientation, again, if people think that they can start to judge that simply by the image of your face, and that we're gathering all that more data on people's images, then we're in a pretty problematic position as a society. One of the stranger ones as well is about the likelihood to be a criminal, and they think they can tell that from your face as well. This was a study done by some professors in China. This really dates back to many pseudosciences back in the 1800s. There was an Italian detective whose name I forget, who put a lot of stock in this. He's one of the most famous detectives back in the 1850s, who thought that a criminal was closer to an ape. So certain kind of more ape-like features of the human face, if they were more prominent, he would be more likely to convict, arrest, etc. Now, many talks like this will show a picture of Minority Report for one reason or another. Usually we talk about it because it predicted kind of gesture control or personalized advertising as you walk past it. The reason I put it in here is because I think potentially if you extrapolate far enough down the line, we could go to a really bizarre space of effectively having a pre-crime unit. We could be looking at people and deciding whether that person is more or less likely to be a criminal. And whilst we might not arrest them, we certainly might monitor them to a greater degree with all the technology that we've been previously speaking about. So again, not just personalized advertising, but how about we had a pre-crime unit eventually based on the amount of stuff that we could recognize. So again, let's think about what this could ultimately mean for how society works and how people act within that society once they know that their face is potentially giving this much away about them. So where do we get to self-fulfilling prophecies and self-defeating prophecies? So if I am told that I am stupid, I will act stupid, that sort of thing. I won't study so hard, I won't bother going to university, etc. You also get self-defeating prophecies. This is Al Capone, who's the kind of the best representation of a self-defeating prophecy. So there's lots of studies about if you're told you have a baby face, you act out against having a baby face and are more aggressive, more violent, etc. So self-fulfilling prophecies and self-defeating prophecies could well be the kind of major upshot of us being able to put a data point, a figure against your likelihood to sit in any one of these persuasions or behaviors, etc. So a kind of pretty dystopian view of what could happen in the rest of the world. Now, as I said, when I first started reading about this, and it's certainly the reaction that the professor I spoke to had, people have a certain level of disbelief in the first place because it sounds ridiculous, but potentially also a sense of kind of it's repellent, repulsive, etc. to think that you could look at someone's face and achieve this. And to a certain degree, you've got to agree. But at the same time, if we're honest with ourselves, during that 1/10 of a second, we like to believe that we are reasonably accurate in how we judge people. So if you then push that further down the line, why shouldn't a machine that has the ability to process vast amounts of data and build models off the back of that, why shouldn't a machine be able to do that with a greater degree of accuracy? Because in the end, we have as human beings a vast array of biases when we are asked to judge anything, whether it's a face, a walk, a document, anything. Anything that we are asked to judge, we will go into it with an enormous amount of biases that the machine never would. Now, it doesn't mean that the data that feeds into the machine didn't have bias applied to it. So, for example, the one that was done on sexual orientation, it would have taken a certain kind of type of person to have had the boldness to upload their photo to a gay dating website in the first place. It could be that the data, the images that were fed into the criminal database, maybe they were arrested because of human bias in the first place. So human bias well might have fed the machine data, but it wouldn't be involved in the processing of it. So again, some of it feels weird, some of it feels repellent, but we've got to be reasonable with ourselves as to think, can a machine actually do this? Why shouldn't it be able to do this? So we have gone full circle back to some pretty weird, debunked pseudosciences of the 1850s. Now, we've gone in some fairly strange directions. I get that, and you're probably forgetting you're at a marketing conference, ultimately. So what we'll try and do is we'll circle back and we'll get to some quick marketing implications at the end.
Thanks, Paddy. So I get to do the marketing implications. Good. So what are we going to do with this? As we say, the change to the topography of human life. So one thing bearing in mind, right, that many technologies have been developed over the course of human history, and almost every single one of them has been used for both good and ill. And so we can believe some of those doomsday or doomsday-like scenarios that Paddy was pointing out, those are very likely to happen to some extent. But we also need to think about the way that technologies can be used for more positive inferences. You know, the old saying is don't judge a book by its cover, but we always do judge books by their covers. I always certainly do, and it's an important piece of information about what the book's going to be like. We're now going to be judging books by their covers even more so when we judge people. So we have to think about what this means. Does it mean the end of privacy? Not necessarily, but I think it does mean the end of anonymity. And anonymity and privacy are not, of course, the same thing. During the course of this presentation, we've been pointing out two types of recognition, right? One is the recognition that I know this is you. That's the end of anonymity, potentially. The other thing is I think I can derive information about your character or your behavior from what you look like. And that potentially threatens privacy because, as we've noticed, people have been very willing to give up privacy in return for utility. And they've been very willing to do that, but nobody is willing to give up privacy, on the other hand, to be abused, to experience prejudice, or to be ripped off. So people don't care about privacy per se, in my view. They care about prejudice, being ripped off, and being abused, and not having utility provided to them. So marketers, brands, etc., what do we do? The technology is going to be out there. The technology is very, very close to being with us now, and we will have opportunities to use that technology for good or for ill, or to step away and see what other people do and let them make the mistakes for us first, and we may very well make those decisions. I think there's probably three rules to bear in mind, or three principles that I think everybody should put into place. And one is the principle about serve, don't sell. Again, the examples that we showed for China are about how facial recognition can be used to provide utility. Long been talking about how the future of marketing, advertising, communications is less about broadcasting messages and more about providing utility, more about providing experience that people find some benefit from and are willing to give you something back in exchange for, be it some money, or be it some data, or something to do with the data trail, or be it some privacy. So you'll have to think, how can we use facial recognition technology in a way that is good and in a way that provides useful utility for people? The one example that comes to me is I would be very, very happy if the Singapore government would apply facial recognition technology immediately. I'm sure there's a database somewhere, but I'd be really happy about it because they've told me that if I lose my employment pass one more time, I can just bugger off out of the country. Thank you very much. So it would be a very useful thing for me personally. So the principle is like, how do you serve, don't sell? How do you provide a utility and a useful experience? Be very conscious of whether that is a useful experience or not. To be honest, we should be conscious of that anyway. There's thousands of marketing messages coming into people every day. What are they going to pay attention to? They're going to pay attention to something that provides some utility. Secondly, it's more about metadata. Use the data on the data. Paddy was telling me earlier today, and Paddy, I've forgotten the name of the retailer that does this, but who films people's feet going into the store, not people's faces. And the reason I film people's feet is there's a lot that you can tell from the shoes that people wear. And there's a lot that you can tell by analysing people's shoe-wearing behaviour that tells you something about what that is. And many of you in the room will agree that your shoes are a part of your self-expression of who you are. Other people maybe not so much. So it's an interesting thing. How can you use the metadata? How can you use for example, the fact that people are in certain environments with certain backgrounds, in the famous example, with cats or with dogs. What can we work out from the metadata around people, which doesn't impinge on invading what people might perceive to be invading individual privacy? And thirdly, I guess, there's going to be a lot of civic and public debate about these types of technology in the next 2 or 3 years. And I think it's important for brands, marketers, and agency, and everybody concerned with communications, to carve out what you think your position and your role is in this. How you can use recognition technologies for good, or do you not, or do you step away from them? But what's your position in the civic debate about how this drives society, not just in a short-term debate about how you connect with or engage with a particular group of consumers for a short-term goal.
Okay, great. Okay, so some quick marketing implications at the end of after a kind of doomsday portrait of what the world could look like if all of this comes to bear. So we've gone through some data, we've gone through some technology, and we've looked back at time at what privacy really means to us as individuals. And I suppose that's why I wanted to end by putting forward the kind of two, what I think are the most profound questions that are raised over the course of looking at data privacy, but privacy more broadly, saying, is this really the end of privacy? So is facial recognition technology in particular what is really going to change the game and mean that everything we expect from society in terms of protecting our privacy, has that ended? And secondly, doing that privacy value equation, is it something that we really want anyway? And that's all from us. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Why not?
I've been seeing someone else's presentation most of the time.
Oh, you want me to do the video, do you?
Oh, do you?
Okay.
Oh, right. There's a summary video.
Is it a summary video?
Well, it could work either way.
Okay. Yeah, if nobody's got any questions, we can do the video first.
Questions. Let's do questions. Let's do questions.
Stop. I didn't do that.
Okay, sorry. Video first, then questions.
No.
No,
just go
questions.
Okay, could we get a mic to that gentleman there, please?
Thank you. I won't tell you my name or who I am. You probably know it already.
Yeah, we worked it out already, yeah.
But this, the other side of this is something like the European GDPR that's coming, and I work in the publishing field, and it's a big problem or a big deal. How do you see that spreading? Will it spread throughout the world? What's OMD telling your clients?
Oh, well, I mean, the GDPR, it's a massive thing. I suppose it's de facto spreading already because it's European citizens regardless of where they are in the world, right? So for people who don't know GDPR, it's a bit of legislation that's going through in Europe where basically, if I'm correct, a company can get hugely punished if any European citizens' data is hacked into, basically, or stolen, or if a company is breached. But it doesn't matter where that European citizen is in the world. So it could be me here in a Singaporean company if they get hacked into and their data goes, I'm a European citizen, so they get a massive fine, as I understand it. Look, to be honest, it means that companies are going to be spending untold amounts of money on compliance. Beyond that, I don't have a bigger, more profound view on what that is. From an O&D perspective, I suppose it's not an area that we're going to get too involved in because it seems like not something that's a particularly sensible thing to tread around, but I think the bottom line would be spend all the money you possibly can on compliance because the risks of not doing it are fairly catastrophic.
I mean, it does apply to some of our clients here, for example, as some of you know, the compliance and data privacy laws in Korea are extremely arduous as well. And so we do advise our clients to be very well advised as to both the data privacy laws and the laws regarding privacy and storage of data and the length of time in which that needs to be stored. But it's not something that we have a particular expertise in, other than to be telling our clients to make sure they are well advised.
Do we have any other questions? Okay, well, we've got a few minutes left. Should we play a video?
Yeah, why not?
Yeah.
Let's go out on the video.
I'm not sure I entirely trust the clock on this anyway, so we'll go with it. Okay, I've got the video on here. Oh, don't worry. Don't worry.
All right, well, before...
Oh, there we go. Have we got sound?
Have we got sound, guys?
I feel bad because Tanya worked so hard on this video. That's why I'm... Okay.
I haven't seen it.
go.
That was definitely worth waiting for in the end. Okay, so